Cool. All right, everybody. Welcome to this week's training in MUNUC Academy. This week, we're going to be focusing on branding and block building. And we're going to introduce ourselves real quick. My name is Emma. I'm your Undersecretary General for Regional Bodies of MUNUC 37. So I'm in charge of the subcategories of regional bodies. Some examples of those regional bodies would be NATO, APEC, the European Union, African Union, etc. And I am a junior at University of Chicago studying neuroscience and psychology right now.
Yeah, so my name is Aman. I'm also junior at the University of Chicago. From Unit 37, I'm the co-chair of the European Union, which is one of the regional bodies that, is technically under Emma. We have a lot of fun topics. We're talking about AI, we're talking about security. Apart from that, I'm a CS Econ major here. So yeah, it's good running.
Yes, Aman, in fact, works under me. So today we are going to go through the agenda for week 4. Today we're going to be talking about branding. We're starting with branding. Then Amon's going to go a little bit into block building. And then we're going to go into some questions as well. So what exactly is branding? Branding is basically a phrase or some kind of catchy sentence that captures the main idea of what you're trying to convey in conference. So it's the theme of your solution. So when you're thinking about doing your draft resolutions, your working papers, you want to kind of have a theme to the overall paper so that people are able to follow along. It's easier. You're also kind of specializing in an area or a topic of kind of the entire committee. So it's much more focused on a specific topic within the committee. Having branding is optional, but it's a very useful way to organize your ideas, stand out in committee. Basically, your chairs will make note of if you're using branding in committee, as well as just making it easier for everyone to be able to read your paper and follow your ideas. So good branding works in speeches, individual clauses and solutions, and as well as document themes and organization as well. So here are some examples from U Chicago's personal Model UN team. In Dissect, one of their one of their branding ideas was kind of the proliferation of drones. So it goes drones for all, right? So it's very short, it's very sweet to the point, but it's easy to remember because you kind of all in unity. Another example would be EcoFin, right? So cryptocurrency and terrorist financing, people over profits, POP. It's very easy to remember, it's catchy, and it also gets to the point where you're kind of focusing on the profits. And it also conveys the idea of putting like people over the idea of profits. And then finally for African Union as well, bridging the digital divide, our land, our tech. Once again, it's kind of like a very unique saying. Not a lot of people are going to use it. And it once again gets very much the idea that, okay, you're thinking about how we're going to connect technology with what we use in our daily lives, I assume. And branding is very based on committee topic and country position as well. So if you're for something, you're going to use terms that are much more positive. If you're against something, maybe terms that are more towards kind of showing debate and reluctancy towards whatever topic you're talking about. So questions you can ask with developing branding ideas: what does your delegation prioritize, right? What are your goals in committee? What kind of solutions are you trying to pass? And what kind of specialization does your kind of country or delegate want to see happen? And what are the themes of your solutions? And can you summarize it as a phrase? Can you make it into an acronym? Can you make it very short and sweet to the point? That's kind of what branding really centralizes on. So making your brand memorable. So how do you want to make people talk about it? One, refer to it when people are sending notes. So in committee, as you know, you're able to communicate with one another through writing notes to another delegate, right? So in your notes, if you come up with a very quick acronym, quick, brand for your topic, you can refer to it while you're in your notes so that people don't have to understand. You don't have to write a very big paragraph about what you're exactly trying to convey. You talk about your branding during unmods. So when you're kind of in a much more casual form of debate, kind of standing up and talking to people, people will kind of remember you as, oh, this might be this committee or this delegate's branding. Explain your branding. So why is it named that? Why are you trying to, or other words, connect, our daily lives with tech? Why are you trying to do X and Y? A brand that is not talked about is a weak brand. So you want to be kind of like the center of attention when it comes to your brand, right? Obviously, it's not going to be easy to come up with on the first try because with Model UN, it takes time to be able to develop a full idea. You can't just think of it really on the spot if you're going to build up ideas alongside of it. But changing a brand can also be well received if it's very poor. So changing it might be a good idea. And bonus points if they're funny and catchy. Puns are great. The chair and the dais love puns because it kind of keeps Molly UN somewhat casual, but in a more serious way. Because Molly UN is obviously very, very serious. But a flow of debate should often sometimes incorporate some humor in it as well. So linking branding to the front room. Speech clauses and working papers can all be connected through branding. So for example, if Delegate A's first speech talks about increasing accountability on a peacekeeping reform committee, they come up with a good brand, then delegates B, C, and D can also work with this kind of idea, right? Delegate A has zoomed in on a specialization within the topic, so they're all going to come up with solutions about increasing accountability. And then their working paper altogether, once again, is specialized because there's a large focus on increasing accountability. They come up with a fun name for that. Then people will be more inclined to remember what this working paper is about as well.
Yeah, and I can do some, I can talk to you guys about block building, and in a few minutes we'll see how like that sort of relates to branding and sort of how it helps you identify who you want to like speak with. I know, shoot, hit the slide. Right. Broadly, what is blocking? Let's talk about that. You'll hear from guys, you'll hear from executives that we're looking for collaboration, we're looking for leadership, we're assess delegates. And the easiest way to like sort of demonstrate this sort of ability is to establish or lead, be an important part of a block, which means you bring people together with similar interests who want to pass similar policy in traditional committees, or who have similar, foreign policy objectives, similar any sort of policy objective really. And you want to get everyone involved. And ideally, the purpose of Model UN is to sort of learn and study diplomacy. It's to understand how you can collaborate with people and how you can find concessions, how you can find compromises so that everyone's policy is, optimal for their country and the people, the country that they represent. And so, to that, the slide talks about encouraging concessions, and ultimately your block wants to pass your draft resolution. That's sort of the ultimate goal of a block. And so, you'll expect many different blocks to form. And I'll talk about a bit more about how to form this block. Emma, could you hit the slide? Okay. Right. I spoke about this very broadly, but a block is simply a group of delegates. They work, you guys work together, you develop solutions, you write a work paper. Hopefully that work paper gets passed, becomes a draft result, and hopefully it gets adopted through committee. Depending on which committee you guys are in, this could be very few people, 4 people is a block, 5 people is a block, 2 people could be a block, or it could be really large, especially in double delegation committees and GAs, 20, 30, 40 delegates. And that's sort of the last point is sort of what I was getting at, which is that initial blocks usually form by delegates with similar interests or goals in committee. So a block might organize around clean energy solutions, for example. A block might organize around similar foreign policy objectives if you guys have decided that these are rigid stances you don't want to compromise on. I wouldn't say that that's a great idea necessarily. It could be, but like we're looking for cooperation. We're looking for how you're able to get other delegates to work with you on compromise and concession and diplomacy, really. And so cooperation is encouraged. So I would say don't come to Model UN, don't come to MUNUC 37, certain of who you're going to work with and who you don't want to work with. I might put you hit the slide. And so this is, sort of to what I was talking about. How do you find delegates you block with? And it's important to think about what is your priority, what is their priority, and ultimately what you want to accomplish committee. So this is sort of what Emma was speaking to with branding. If you come out with a very important thesis that defines you as a delegate or you as a delegation or eventually you as a block, that helps people find out very quickly that whether they're aligned or not aligned to their policy to your policy goals. You come out and say, I'm going to work towards a bill that is radically clean energy, at the cost of maybe finances or capital or deregulate or regulates very heavily a lot of existing like oil and gas companies. It's a very important, very strong policy suggestion. So you find like a neat, phrase for it, like Emma suggested, all of a sudden every other delegate in the room goes, okay, I have something similar and I want to talk to them and I want to be able to like work with them because clearly that, that we think similarly and we want similar policy to pass for the draft result. And then, the second half is general tips, be an affable person, be a sort of welcoming person. That's a really important part of Model UN. Ultimately, this, a people-centric activity. Don't exclude people, even if different conditions. That's a lot of stuff too. I understand it's really easy, especially if you're newer to Model UN, sort of get caught up in like real world blocks that exist, either on policy lines, on historical lines, on like just a lot of lines. There's a lot of very prominent blocks in current geopolitics. And I would encourage all of you to sort of not worry too deeply about that. Maybe, it's an initial place to think of where your policy wants to go. But it's crucial at, things like MUNUC 37 that you work with people who might not initially seem to have the same idea, and you sort of work towards a compromise, towards a concession. The idea of legislation that is, crossing that bridge and it helps you both do something better conceptually. And that's sort of the last point. The goal of Model UN is not just to make your idea win. It's not enough that you're like an exceptional orator, an exceptional like speaker, and you have the right ideas. It's important that you can work with people who might not see eye to eye with you on legislation, on policy, and you can come to them and convince them that compromises are worth it, that you're willing to compromise somewhere, and then your block can, come to be. Yeah. So, an extension of, finding delegates to block with, friends and classmates are, they're good, like safety, it's good comfort. But I wouldn't recommend it. We want to see, blocks form on legislation, policy goals. We want to see blocks form on, wait, I'm actually back that. Yeah, thank you. We want to see blocks form on lines that are more grounded in what's happening in the front room. We don't, like in committee. It would be a little poor if maybe, we see that you guys have completely different policy objectives, but are working together, but you happen to know each other. While, it's really nice that you guys have like meet everyone during MUNUC 37. There's enough like social stuff to do. In committee, I would really encourage you to be working through people, and finding out who you can work with, work on compromise, things like that. And also, you get to make new friends. I've been to a lot of Model UNs. Sometimes people you meet in a block with similar policy objectives just end up being like great guys, great people that you hang out with. Just right. What does a block do? I've spoken about this very briefly, but a block in most committees will write a working paper, give speeching, advocating for a specific solution. Additionally, and you guys will learn more about this later, blocks will merge with one another, or they'll, to either arrive at a draft resolution, or you'll merge policies. Sometimes the dais will suggest it, sometimes they won't, depending on who your dais is. And then you will go up for authorship panel on their content, which is sort of Q&A almost, of people who sponsor or write working papers. But more on that later. For the purposes of today's session, a block will simply come together to put their policies of their working paper, and then members of the block will give speeches, whether that's through mods or unmods or other forms of committee, advocating for the specific solutions that you put down.
Okay, so I'm nervous. How do I approach people? Well, good question, Amon. Know that everybody is actually very, very nervous. It's kind of a very stressful time because in Model UN, you have to think on the spot. You're interacting with people for the first time. And it's also a much more professional environment. But just know that everybody wants to work with you as well. Opening speeches is the time when people are kind of presenting their ideas for the first time in committee. So make sure you're listening to them to see if your ideas are able to align with another delegates. Send delegates friendly notes. Just so you know, everybody is kind of in the same boat. Everyone wants to make friends. They want to make allies. They want to form blocks. No one is entering the committee with the mindset that they want to make enemies, or kind of cause debate, or I guess disagreement. And when there are groups of people already discussing, make sure to join them. Don't be afraid to kind of put your foot in the door and kind of open it up so that you're able to, talk and be confident. Introduce yourself, ask them what their positions are, etc. Here is an example of a note, not a crisis note, just a regular note. Pretending I am Zimbabwe. Hello, Ethiopia. I'm Emma. I really liked your speech on water sanitation projects in rural communities. This is also something that my country, Zimbabwe, wants to do. Do want to work together and chat in the next unmod. And it's from Zimbabwe. 99% of the time, they're going to respond to a note like that because they also as well are looking for allies. So as you can see, I first addressed their country. I was very friendly, building a personal connection, right? Which is very, very important at this time. So why do I want to work with them? I see a lot of our kind of country goals aligning. And so I'm concise and precise about why I think that we would make good allies. And then I'm telling them how to find me, so the next unmod, I would come out and just meet up with them during the kind of more casual form of debate, which is kind of when you're discussing, trying to form alliances, and forming blocks as well. And then I sign up with my country so that they know who I am. Sometimes you don't really, I'm not sure if you have to sign off with your name. Sometimes if you want to just be referred to as your own country, you do not need to put your name. Sometimes I will say, hello, Ethiopia, I am Zimbabwe, but it's kind of up to your own discretion.
Right. And just on that very last note, like a lot of the notes that's very like model pristine note. The whole it's very formal. Feel free to make it a little less formal if you think that's more your style. I've received notes in committee, which is when I like your speech. Sounds good. Can we talk about it? And it's sort of just played by the ear. What sounds comfortable to you? And some other ideas to start off with. Where do you want to look to, or who do you want to look to start a block? Is obviously talk to people outside the committee room if you have the time, if you break. Introduce yourself. Let them know if I'm a delegate to the European Union. I am, for example, Germany. And you can either ask them if they're the same committee, and if they are, look for similarities in policy or how they're approaching it. Or you could just talk to them. What did you think about topic A or topic B? Did you enjoy the suggestions that are made in the background guides about topic A, B? How did you feel about them? Your background guides are a really easy conversation to talk about what you like, what you dislike, because most of your background guides suggest solutions, proposals that you can really quickly go over with the delegate you meet on the fly of like, oh, that sounded good to me. That did. Similarly, look for delegates you think you'd work really well with, even if they haven't spoken. It doesn't necessarily just means just that, don't necessarily go for the loudest people in the room, although that's really good if you're speaking. It just means to look around for delegates who seem to have um, actionable steps that they want to put in their blocks, who you seem to think of great ideas and you'd want to collaborate with, people you think could just be really fun to collaborate with. That's fine. This is like a learning educational activity. If you think you'd learn a lot from somebody and you really like the way that they do model you, and feel free to send them a note, be like, hey, I would really like to work with you. And the third point I've spoken about, which is reach out to countries, your countries already collaborating in the real world. I've told you the geopolitical blocks exist. They exist for good reasons. Broadly, these countries want the same legislation. Um, so this is a really good starting point. If I'm in the European Union and it's a really easy block of Western European nations. If I'm discussing something like, uh, financial aid to poorer nations, it's a very easy stance, to Germany, France, to be in a block and be like, we will lead this block and we will tell you that this happened. And obviously, it's a really good point to start with a committee because broadly your policy aims, your legislative aims are going to be similar to the nations that, actually have these blocks in real life. But I would say keep an open mind. Often model you and you'll find that, with how dynamic Munich tends to be, with how interesting your, fellow delegates are, with how interesting your diet could be. Keep an eye out, keep an ear open to different ideas that may come from unexpected countries, from unexpected real block positions. And that can lead to some really interesting cooperation and really compelling legislation that you guys present in your working papers. And then obviously the last part is just, if you're already in block, it's just you and one other person, or you and a few other people, and you really like what you're doing, maybe you guys can spend the next unmod instead of talking to each other. Unmod is sort of your unmoderated discussion where you have the floor where all the delegates talk around. Maybe you say, okay, we need to recruit more people to our block because right now getting votes is more important, and we think we have good legislation. We think we have good policy suggestions that people would like us. So instead of talking to the four of y'all, between the four of y'all next unmod, tell everyone, let's go and try and get at least one or two other countries on board so that, if 14 is the majority, hopefully you guys can have 15 by the time the next voting procedure happens, or whatever your voting procedure is. The idea is, recruit more people in the blogs, give more momentum in committee so that ultimately things that align with your policy aims are across.
Next steps. So what's next for MUNUC Academy? Next week, we're going to be dealing with mergers and negotiations for the traditional track. And so for non-traditional track, I guess all of your crisis and hybrid front room directives and breaking into the front room. Guess you guys can refer to your emails for future training sessions as well. So we're going to see if there are any questions.
Yes, I can. It says, do you have any tips for finding delegates with similar ideas in a big committee room? The first one, which is, do you have any tips for finding delegates with similar ideas? I think that a really good place to start with, if you guys have a really early unmod, let's say, in your first committee session, is just go to countries with similar geopolitical stances as you, countries that you've researched or, thought about that I want to get this policy passed, and here are some countries. So this would be really important prep work for you to do, which is that I want this policy aim. Let me find a list of countries, or let me think about who would want similar things, and then you can reach out to them as soon as the first unmod starts, or something like that. Another really good thing that I think Munich does really well, and your diet can hopefully be able to do is make sure that everyone's given a fair chance to speak, and that it really helps you identify who's looking towards what policy suggestions. So it's either look at the moderated parts of the conversation and reach out to somebody who you think has similar aims as yours, or during the unmoderated session, spend maybe the first few committee, first few minutes in unmods talking around, looking at who's got similar ideas as you. And your best heuristic is probably to either talk to people before committee, outside committee, or have a research list of countries that you want to approach and see if they want something similar in a really large committee. Emma, can you still see the questions, or do you want me to go through them and then you can answer them as I read them?
Yeah, go ahead. I don't know why it's not
Right.
working on my device. So what's the next one?
No worries. The next question is simply, how do you pass a note?
Oh, okay, good question. So basically, when it comes to um just traditional wise, usually what happens sometimes there'll be a note passer, but because regional bodies is so small, usually you just ask somebody in between to kind of pass that note over. The important thing about passing notes is that you're not disruptive when people are kind of giving a speech. So if we're in a moderated caucus, let's say we there's somebody up giving a speech. What you want to do is you kind of want to wait until they're done giving that speech. And then during that transition period, you're actually able to, you can't stand up, but you're able to pass a note or ask somebody in between to pass a note to a specific country. And so that's kind of how you pass a note. You write it. So you should bring paper and then kind of pass it in a very non-disruptive way throughout committee.
Yeah, and if you're like worried about like the non-disruptive part, in the first few minutes or very first session, your chairs will probably help you work through this. Be like, hey, I have a question.
Exactly.
How do you want us to do logistics? And they'll give you like a very clear, concise answer, depending on
Mhm.
how big your room is. So
Yes, and the chairs also have assistant chairs that they can, or the dais has assistant chairs that are able to help out with passing notes as well. If it comes to a point where it's quite disruptive.
just how would I use branding in speech? Do you want to take that, Emma? Or do you want to?
Sure, yeah, I can. So, kind of opening up with it. Let me think. I am, representing let's say the topic is like recyclables or something. And I am USA and I'm trying to come up with, an idea for energy saving, right? And I would go into a speech, I'd be like, hey, I very much am on board with I'm not happy with the current regulations for energy saving. I want to kind of propose a new plan, which I call AIR. AIR stands for aerated irrigation recyclables. And I would just go into that topic about why I would believe that this is the solution to helping with recyclables and why I'm not happy with the regulations. But you notice how like it's very short, it's very simple. It relates back to kind of what the topic is. And that's kind of what I thought of on the spot. But like I said, it relates back to the topic at hand, which I think is the goal to kind of how you want to give your speech. But then I would go into the points of why I think air is the best solution. And then people would probably send me notes right afterwards being like, hey, I really like air. Can we meet in the next unmod to discuss it?
Yeah, and before I read out the next question, I've also heard speakers just begin their speeches with large branding slogans just because that's memorable and that sticks to people. But right, the next question, Emma, is do you have any tips for coming up with acronyms or fun clause names? Do you want to take
Well,
this?
like, yeah, okay. Well, you and I can both take this, but I think the goal is to kind of just think about words that really, or in my opinion, words or phrases that really much relate to your topic, right? So think about kind of like what's trending right now. I'm trying to think if there was any good ones in my, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but I'm trying to think if there were any good ones in the past that I had come across. Amon, have you come across any very good branding acronyms?
We definitely have. Even last year when I was your AC at Upside, there were definitely some really good builds for us with fun acronyms. I just can't even remember them right now. I will also say, like, if they come naturally and you're like having fun with them, that's good. But your like diets, your execs, like I'm a chair, I'm not going to look poorly
Yeah.
at somebody having a serious paper that's just titled, "Hey, like this is policy objective." It would be nice
I
though.
I
Yeah.
do remember one of them actually. So Amon and I ran a committee last year for Upside Foods, which is a lab grown meat company. And somebody was not on board with kind of how Upside was running its internal
Yeah.
functions. So they came up with they started it off with telling us how they believe that the company's gonna crash, and they called kind of their solution downside foods, right? Because we were upside and then it goes downside foods. So basically listing all the negatives and the potential cons of this company. So just kind of thinking along the lines of, okay, what would people really enjoy? What do I think the diets would kind of capture their attention as well? And it's just something for the kids to be able to, the other delegates to remember, oh, this is what they're kind of known for. This is what the delegate is known for.
Yeah. Yeah, and like Upside also a lot of very fun carrot ones. We were a meat company, so a lot of moo in your papers. But the idea is just like have fun with it. Downside's a really good example because everyone already knows you're the opposite block, so it's like an easy thing. But don't worry too much if you like can't generate a pun. You're more than fine to submit just a piece of, serious, earnest policy. The next question is how do I lead my block? So I can speak about this like really briefly, and then I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
like add something. Um, I would say to lead a block, right? Like the central mission of a block is ultimately just to find yourselves around a similar policy aim. And so the easiest way to lead a block is simply to have good policy, to have policy that you think people would agree with, and like good common sense suggestions and speeches in your speakers list, in your moderator caucuses. They're things that think will appeal to the audience and help solve the problem the committee has been tasked with solving. What this basically does in helping you lead a block is it drastically increases your chances of somebody sending you a note or finding you an unmoderated caucus and saying, hey, I really like what you said. I think those made a lot of sense, and I'd be really interested in like helping out or adding an amendment or a clause or simply just working with you. And that's probably your best bet. I think a lot of like leadership in a block is downstream of like just good research and know your stuff. The second thing that I would have to say is a really important part of leading a block is sort of being congenial. Make sure that you're listening to everyone, make sure that you're cooperating with everyone. This is really like underrated part. It's not enough to have researched everything and to have like read everything. It's really important that you pay attention to everyone and you keep in mind that your policy aims might not be somebody else's, and you need to be willing to make that compromise. And you need to be willing to moderate that compromise if you're really interested in leading a block, right? Because there's a lot of people, you need to sort of moderate that tension. But I would say, make sure you're like cooperating with everyone, you're like nice, you're like making space for everyone.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Just to add on to that, I think also being able to incorporate everyone's ideas. And if you have questions about somebody's idea, don't be afraid to ask it, right? If you don't understand what somebody's plan is, make sure you ask them to elaborate a little bit. But I do think that like making sure that everyone's ideas are included is very big, because you'll have your dais that are they're all gonna be walking around during the unmoderated caucus. So they're taking notes on kind of, how are you acting with everybody? Are you inclusive? Are you exclusive? Are you leading the block, or are you more listening? Make sure that when you speaking to that, everybody is listening to you. Because otherwise, your idea might not be incorporated into this block or this potential solution that's about to be proposed. Yes. Do we
You guys have any
have
other questions? Because maybe we can give you guys a minute or two for other questions. Otherwise, we might be good for the session.
no other questions? Okay, then. Thank you guys so much for coming to this week's session of MUNUC Academy. We will see you guys next week. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and to use those branding and blocking skills during MUNUC. And Amon and I will be very happy if you do.
Yes, and very critical. That's the joke. But yes. Yeah, have a nice day, guys. Thank you for joining us. I hope this was helpful. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.